As I said a minute ago, there's just a feeling of strength and support that one gets when you come together in a larger group, especially in these days. So it's good to see you, those who are here for Shul, every Shabbos, those who are here for Simone as we get to celebrate this great Simcha. The community being together is just really important. And Mazel Tov to the Gaffins. Thank you for bringing us this joy, this Simcha at this time. As I said earlier, this has been a really difficult time, and I've definitely felt it on many levels. There is a kind of pervasive sadness and loss that seems to be hanging over almost every moment. And then I've been trying to find those little moments of joy, at moments like a bar mitzvah, at moments like a wedding, an ufruf, a celebration of someone getting married, the birth of a child, little moments. Sharon and I took a couple of hours to hang out with a couple of friends this week to kind of take our minds off of everything that is going on in Israel. And so we sat down to talk about other things, started to talk about our kids, and within maybe 30 seconds, we're talking about anti-Semitism on campus, and we're back to Israel. So it's hard. It's hard to not be back in that space. It's hard not to be feeling that intense emotion all the time. There's a lot of pain. I listened to a podcast this week. I think it was called, what was it called? The Promised? The Promised podcast. I'd never heard it before, and someone recommended it to me. And it opened with this unbelievable description of all of these artistic installations that have been made around Tel Aviv with 240 lights or chairs or beds or teddy bears or all different things. And it was both something that you listened to and it was heartrending, but it was also intensely moving to think about how we can process trauma. And for many, it's about talking. For some, it's about writing or about art. This week, I listened to a beautiful playlist of songs that Israeli artists, musicians have written in the last month. And it was probably the most cathartic hour of my week because I just played the songs and just sat there crying, listening to them. The beauty, the intensity, the feeling. There's so many stories of loss, of heroism, and amidst the tears, there are these embers of hope. One story really got to me. It was about a reserve captain, Sagi Golan, and his partner, Omer Ochana. And they were scheduled to get married on October 20th. They had picked out a beautiful song to walk down the aisle to, I Was Fortunate to Love, by an Israeli star named Ivri Lieder, whose song was going to accompany them down the aisle. On the morning of October 7th, Sagi and Ohana, both high-tech workers, woke up in their apartment in coastal Herzliya, turned on the radio to hear the news, and Golan then jumped out of bed. He didn't even get up, his partner Omer said, quote, even though nobody had called him up to report for duty, he had his uniform in hand, he brushed his teeth, and with a few minutes, we were at the front door. He gave me a kiss on the lips, and he said he'd be back in less than a week, as their wedding was the following week. Now, Sagi, for his military service, which is compulsory in Israel, either military or national service, was accepted into a very prestigious unit, the 8200 intelligence unit, whose graduates often go on to careers in high tech and business. But Golan Sagi Golan chose to enter into a combat unit instead, and he completed the course for Lotar, an elite special unit dealing with counterterrorism. And that morning, he quickly joined up with several of the soldiers in his unit. He was one of the commanders, and they were able to rescue some of the people who were under attack at Kibbutz Be'eri, which sustained terrible losses and has come to epitomize the terrorist attacks of October 7th. It lost more than 120 members of its kibbutz, entire families, and homes were set on fire so that the residents had to come out before they were murdered, and they took many hostages. Sagi Golan led his unit valiantly, and although he and his soldiers were vastly outnumbered, they tried their best. Unlike other militaries, I always think it's important to note that in the Israeli military, the officers aren't leading from the back. Right? The officers lead from the front. They're the first ones to go in, and they say, Acharai, follow me. And that becomes the motto. And it's a very different kind of military focus, which is why so many officers are often killed, because they're the ones who go first. After 12 hours of fighting nonstop, Sagi was hit by gunfire and killed. The musician, Yitzhak Lieder, who heard about this incident and that he was to be married, actually came to his funeral and played that song live. There were white cotton flowers that were produced for all the tables at the wedding, but those became a wreath at the funeral instead. The couple had planned to have children via a surrogate, and Golan's sperm was frozen after he died. Now, Israel, while having many rights for LGBTQ people and partners, did not yet have a law that said that IDF partners, service members as widows and widowers would have the same rights as is the case with heterosexual partners. And so the Knesset, which hasn't been passing a lot of great laws, passed that law last week. And according to his surviving partner, Omer, this new law allows Sagi now to have a child and to embrace him with love. Joy and sadness, weddings and funerals, birth and death, all intertwined in every moment. This week, our Torah reading, Parshat Hayyei, begins with the death of Sarah. And in fact, the first verse is very curious because it has this phrase, Hayyei Sarah, 2 times. Eila Hayyei Sarah. This is the life of Sarah. It continues with her age at death and then repeats the phrase again, as I said. It's as if the Torah is holding on to her life somehow, not willing to let her go, holding her memory even as she dies. In the midst of these deaths, we find, at the end of the parasha, there is a second death as Abraham passes away. Now, in the midst of these deaths, we find this narrative that Simone talked about with Isaac's bride-to-be being found by Abraham's servant Eliezer. And when Eliezer returns to Canaan with Rebekah, who is to wed Isaac, the Torah says kind of that it's love at first sight. And it uses the word that he loved her. Isaac loved Rebekah. Vaye'ehaveha. And he loved her. This is the first instance where we find in the Torah love between 2 partners. Death and life. Funerals and weddings. Sadness with sparks of joy. These are the intense emotions we are feeling. But there are also other emotions too. There is deep hurt. There's deep pain. and even anger. I've been feeling all of these. It's hard to keep others in mind when we ourselves feel so hurt. But we must. Even when we are hurting, even when we are mourning with our family and friends in Israel and here, when we are praying for our hostages, when we are experiencing vitriolic anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, our tradition reminds us to stop and still keep others in mind. While it's hard not to think of this moment as some kind of competition for greater victimhood, everyone is a victim of Hamas. Innocent Gazans, Israelis, people of 29 nationalities who were killed or taken hostage, and all of us. Both Israelis and innocent Gazans are all victims. Hamas killed our own people, and it's killing its own, making them into human shields and shooting them even when they try to leave. I'm proud that Israel is trying to save innocents, opening humanitarian corridors protected by Israeli tanks, trying to prevent Hamas from killing its own civilians. And Israeli commandos risk their lives each day or each night by trying to prevent civilian losses by going out and marking their targets for bombing. But as I watch and read about Israel and what we Jews are experiencing, I still get that feeling of anger within myself. But I keep trying to come back to the Torah, and thankfully it offers us another way. It teaches us a way of reconciliation. It teaches us a way to see the humanity in every other person, reminding us that we were strangers in Egypt, and therefore we treat the stranger and those who are different from us with kindness and love. The Torah reminds us that we are created in the image of God and that every human being is created in the image of God. When Abraham dies at the end of the parasha, the Torah says that both Ishmael and Isaac buried him together. And it's noteworthy because where has Ishmael been all this time? He's thrown out of his father and his mother, Hagar, and he had been thrown out of their home by Abraham, really by Sarah, and who had accused Ishmael of being a bad influence upon her son Isaac. And that's it. We don't hear from him or Hagar in the narrative. But suddenly he's back at the burial and death of his father. The Torah gives us a sense that the two of them are working together in the burial and in the loss, and that there's been some kind of reconciliation. Given that the Jewish tradition sees Ishmael as the progenitor of Muslims and Isaac as the progenitor of Jews and later Christians, this moment of coming together perhaps sets out a goal for us, as distant as it might be. Perhaps just a glimmer of hope, perhaps an elusive one, but one that we should always hold out and always hold on to. That we continue to hope and hold everyone in our hearts. Of course, we should stand up for ourselves as we're doing this week, but not do so in a way that we become mired in hate. We try to hold a different vision, that vision of reconciliation, of people coming together, however impossible it might seem today. There's one other very noteworthy aspect to this scene. We're told that right after the burial takes place, Isaac goes to the city of Be'er Lachai Roi. What is a Be'er? A well. What is Lachai? What is the word Chai? Alive, life. And Roi from the word Lirot, to see. What does this mean exactly? He goes to a town named after the well that's there, the well that sees life. A living well. Some kind of sustaining well. A well maybe where the living one, where God sees me. It's an interesting town because wells usually maybe aren't so powerful. But this well actually appeared earlier in the narrative. When Hagar is sent out of Abraham's house with her son Ishmael, they are in desperate need of water, and this well appears. This is the well that sees Hagar, sees her suffering. And then later in the narrative, when we see Isaac coming to meet Rebekah, right? It says that Isaac has been coming from the town of Be'er Lachai Roi. Somehow Isaac moved to this place where Hagar went, maybe already as an act of reconciling in the family. Rashi says that Isaac went there specifically to bring back Hagar, right, his stepmother, if you will, and to bring her back so that she can marry Abraham and that they can be back together and reconcile. This is a vision of a totally different reality. While, of course, there's much discord in the narratives of Genesis, people can also find this thread of hope that's woven into the text. People move apart, the relationships break down, but they also come back together. But the first thing that has to happen is they need to be seen. Be'er lachai ro'i. They need to see. This well sees us, and then it gives us light. This well is able to see Hagar, Ishmael, Yitzchak. To be seen, to be heard, that's the first step in any healing process. We must try to see Ishmael and Isaac, to see Hagar and Abraham. It's not easy. When I think about Sagi and Omer, I'm lost in their tears. But even as I know that Israel's fight continues, I know that I have to hold both people and all peoples in my heart to stay in that unsettling place of nuance and complexity. Amidst this horrible time, I try to hold on to both. I know I'm struggling, but I'm trying. Trying to hold the pain that so many of us feel in our community and beyond. And it can be overwhelming. But the Torah sets forth a vision of Isaac and Ishmael who become the ancestors of Jews and Muslims and who come together in this week's reading. A vision of them and all of us being seen. I see the rifts. They're here in our community, right here in Lexington and all the towns around us. The rifts between Muslims and Jews, between Jews of different perspectives, between people in our workplaces, among friends, all being pulled apart on this issue. We can't resolve it all. But like this well that sees, we can see the basic humanity of all. And we can hold on to both. In doing so, we can then hold on to hope. Like the living well, we can try to see everyone, to hold both the joy and sadness. And in doing so, let us all find a way to hope. Shabbat Shalom.